Hello, and welcome back to the Great and Spacious Building. I'm Dr. Wayne Denton. Last week we stood in the mud of the Erie Canal. We looked at the soil that grew the Smith family, the crushing poverty, the displacement of the market revolution, and the desperate turn to folk magic as a way to reclaim agency in a world that had stripped the family of it. We established that Joseph Smith was not an anomaly. He was a symptom. He was the inevitable result of a collision between the pre-modern world of his ancestors and the hyper-modern, new capitalistic world of Jacksonian America. Today, we're moving from the soil to the seed. We're moving from the conditions of the miracle to the mechanism of that thing. We are continuing our comparative historiography of Fawn Brodie's seminal 1945 biography, No Man Knows My History, and John G. Turner's 2025 scholarly landmark, Joseph Smith, The Rise and Fall of an American Prophet. Specifically today, we're going to perform a close reading of chapters 3, 4, and 5 in both text. This period, roughly the autumn of 1827 through the summer of 1829, is the crucible. It encompasses the retrieval of the gold plates, the catastrophic loss of the 116 pages of the manuscript, and the rapid-fire translation of the current Book of Mormon. This is the area where the village seer becomes the American prophet. And as we analyze how Brodie and Turner treat these events, I want you to keep a specific framework in mind. My own thesis on this transition. Again, as a historian, I'm not here to just recite what others have said. I'm also adding in some of my own historical analysis as we go through here. So, based off of this, my reading of this, and I would love to see what you think in the comments from these two biographies, or one or the other, whatever, I believe Joseph Smith was fighting a war on two fronts. He had two distinct audiences that he needed to capture, and they spoke two very different languages. First, there's the folk magic audience. This was his family, his neighbors, and local treasure diggers. They spoke the language of materiality. They needed physical artifacts. They needed gold, silver, and seeing stones. To them, a prophet without a prop was just a crazy person. The second audience is the revivalist audience. This was the broader, burned-over district. The Methodists, the Baptists, the Seekers, they spoke the language of spirituality and text. They didn't care about the gold, they cared about doctrine. They needed a Bible. My argument today is that the gold plates were the bait for the first group, and the translation was the hook for the second. Joseph Smith's genius and his peril lay in the ability to walk the tightrope between these two worlds without falling. So let's open the books here. We begin in September 1827, the annual visit to the Hill Cumorah. Fawn Brodie in her chapter 3 treats this moment with the flair of a Gothic novelist. She titles her chapter The Golden Bible, but her tone is dripping with secular irony. For Brodie, the retrieval of the plates is the climax of a long con. She portrays Joseph as a young man who has painted himself into a corner. He's been telling stories about Indian gold for years to avoid manual labor, but now that pressure from his father and his neighbors has hit a boiling point. They need and want to see the goods. Brodie writes with a psychological certainty, and I quote, "He was the victim of his own imagination," meaning Joseph Smith here, end quote. She suggests that Joseph likely fabricated a set of plates out of tin, or perhaps filled a frock coat with sand or lead to give it the requisite weight. She's obsessed with the materiality of the deception. She notes that when Joseph comes running into the house breathless, claiming he was attacked by men in the woods, it is a piece of theater designed to shut down inquiry. If you're terrified for your life, people are less likely to ask questions and specifically ask you to open the box. Brodie views the Gold Bible Company, the loose coalition of Joseph, his family, and Martin Harris, as sort of a joint stock venture in fraud. She highlights the skepticism of the neighbors, specifically the Hussey and Chase families, who she frames as rational actors seeing through the Smiths family's nonsense at this point. Now let's pivot to John Turner and his analysis. Turner doesn't dismiss the possibility of deception here, but he complicates the intent. In his chapter 3, Turner situates the retrieval not in the context of a con, but in the context of ritual. He argues that we cannot understand the plates unless we understand the evolving nature of the entity who's guarding them. Brodie sort of laughs at the idea of this toad or the bloody Spaniard that early sources claim guarded the treasure, but Turner takes this seriously as ethnographic data. He traces the evolution of the guardian. It starts as a violent spirit, and slowly over the course of Joseph's visits, morphs into an angel. Turner argues this isn't just Joseph changing his story to sound better, it's Joseph syncretizing his worldview. He's merging the folk magic of Vermont in the Christianity of New York. Turner also emphasizes the social pressure in a way Brodie misses completely. Brodie thinks the neighbors wanted the gold because they were greedy. Turner argues they wanted the gold because they felt entitled to it. He introduces us to this idea of a treasure seer network. Men like Samuel Lawrence and Willard Chase, these weren't skeptics, they were believers in this folk magic reality. They had gone digging with Joseph. They had looked into their own stones and seen the plates as well. This is a crucial distinction. Brodie thinks Joseph was hiding the plates from skeptics who would expose him. Turner thinks Joseph was hiding the plates from believers who might steal them. My thoughts on this validates this two-front war theory. Look at who Joseph is dealing with in 1827. It's not the theologians yet. It's the diggers. It's his father, Joseph Sr., who is desperate for a win after his ginseng failure and the many economic struggles that have come after that. Joseph needed the plates to be heavy. He needed them to be physical. Why? Because you cannot sell a spiritual concept to a materialist crowd. If Joseph had come down from the hill and said, "I have a message from God in my heart," Willard Chase would have laughed at him, but a heavy box, a box that dislocated your thumb when you fought off attackers, that's social currency in the treasure digging world. The prop, whether it was tin, lead, actual ancient golden plates, was the necessary ticket to entry here. It bought Joseph the time and the protection he needed to move to the next phase. It secured the loyalty of the folk magic demographic that he had surrounded himself with. But the prop had a problem. It was dangerous. As long as the gold existed, men would hunt for it. Joseph needed to transmute the gold into something else. He needed to turn the metal into a message. This brings us to the pivotal moment early in Mormon history, the loss of the 116 pages. Let's set the scene here. Sorry, if we look at this, so I'm living in Arizona. I'm originally a New Yorker, completely off task here. Stewart's Shop, upstate New York, best ice cream, best coffee, best milkshake. Stewart's, if anyone's watching this, consider a sponsorship. That'd be pretty cool. Or just find a way to ship your ice cream to me. It's amazing. So let's get back to this. We're at the 116 pages. Let's set the scene. Joseph has moved to Harmony, Pennsylvania to escape the treasure seekers around him. He's dictating the text to Martin Harris. Martin is the bridge between these two worlds. He is a superstitious treasure hunter, but he's also a respected, wealthy farmer who yearns for religious respectability in society. Fawn Brodie's handling of this situation is masterful storytelling. She introduces the antagonist, Lucy Harris, Martin's wife. This Just reminds me of the South Park episode talking about this. But for Brodie, Lucy Harris is the hero of the story. She is the rationalist detective. She demands to see the plates. She knows her husband is being swindled out of his farm to support this little old Smith boy. When Martin takes the 116 pages north to Palmyra to show her, and they subsequently vanish, Brodie views this as a trap sprung by a smart woman. Brodie's analysis of Joseph's reaction is cynical. When Joseph hears the pages are gone, he cries out, "Oh my God, all is lost!" Brodie interprets this not as religious despair, but as the panic of a criminal who has lost the evidence. She argues if this was a genuine translation, he could just do it again. But because he was making it up as he went along, improvising a complex narrative, he knew he could not reproduce it verbatim. Brodie frames the subsequent revelation, which commands Joseph not to retranslate the pages, as a brilliant Machiavellian maneuver. She writes that Joseph turned a catastrophe into a confirmation of his prophetic calling, inventing the evil men plot to explain why he had to translate a different set of plates. John Turner reads the same text but sees a different psychological interiority. Turner focuses on the power dynamics. In his chapter 4, he argues that up until this moment, Martin Harris was the dominant partner in this relationship. Harris had the money, the age, and the social status. Joseph was truly the employee here. Turner argues that the loss of the pages was the moment Joseph Smith truly became a prophet. Why? Because the trauma of the event broke him. Turner describes Joseph's agony here, not just fear of exposure, but a genuine, terrifying fear of God. Turner takes Joseph's own writing seriously when Joseph says he feared man more than God. For Turner, the revelation that follows isn't a convenient excuse, it's a chastisement. It is Joseph asserting dominance over Martin Harris. When Joseph emerges from his depression, he is no longer asking Martin for permission on anything. He is commanding him. Turner notes that this is the moment the translation shifts from a collaborative project to a divine dictation where Joseph is the sole conduit. My thoughts here. I want to look at this through the lens of the pivot. The loss of the 116 pages is the death of the folk magic phase and the birth of this theological phase. Think about the content of those lost pages. We don't have them, but reports from other individuals suggest that they were a secular history. Names, genealogy, wars. It was a history of the Indians. It was exactly the kind of thing a storyteller entertaining his family would write. But when Joseph restarts the translation after the crisis, the tone changes. He also doesn't start the translation over from the beginning. We have this theory that he's starting in the book of Mosiah. He starts translating the small plates of Nephi, and what's on the small plates? It's a theology, prophecy, sermons. I argue that this crisis forced Joseph to abandon the narrative that appealed to treasure seekers and to double down on the doctrine that would appeal to the religious marketplace. He realized a gold Bible wasn't enough to sustain the movement. He needed a New Testament. The loss of the pages actually liberated Joseph Smith. He didn't have to stick to history anymore. He could now write a sermon. He could address the issues of the 1820s, infant baptism, secret combinations, looking at you Masons, the nature of the Godhead. This was the moment the gold became irrelevant and the book became everything. Now we enter the final stage of this analysis for these three chapters, the arrival of Oliver Cowdery and the rapid-fire translation process of the text that, for the most part, we have today. This is chapter 5 in both biographies, and here the divergence between Brodie and Turner is starkest. Fawn Brodie views the translation process through the lens of environmental psychology. She argues the Book of Mormon is a provincial sponge. She argues that Joseph Smith was a genius sponge who soaked up every idea floating around the burned-over district, anti-Masonry, republicanism, anti-Catholicism, debates about Indian origins, and squeezed them out into a coherent narrative. Brodie describes the mechanics of the translation, the stone in the hat, with a sneer. She envisions Joseph with his face buried in the hat, improvising for hours, while Oliver Cowdery sits there, a gullible schoolteacher, scribbling it all down. She dismisses Cowdery as a passive tool. She writes that Joseph had a great memory and a fertile imagination, which allowed him to weave these complex plots without any notes to be seen. For Brodie, the miracle is actually a testament to Joseph's intellect. She famously asserts that the book is one of the finest examples of American frontier fiction. Now, jumping to John Turner rejects this general fiction hypothesis, not that he thinks the Book of Mormon is historically true. He's a secular historian here, but he thinks fiction is the wrong category. Turner introduces the concept of automatic writing and a Pentecostal experience, this religious rebirth experience, very common during the Second Great Awakening. He looks at Oliver Cowdery not as a dupe, but as a co-creator of the religious environment. Turner highlights the speed of the production, roughly 65 to 75 days for over 500 pages. He argues that this speed created a pressure cooker of spiritual intensity. He points out something Brodie glosses over, the priesthood restoration. During the translation, Joseph and Oliver go into the woods and claim to be visited by John the Baptist. Turner analyzes this is not a delusion, but it's actually a structural necessity. They were translating a book that talked about authority and baptism. They inevitably asked the question, do we have the authority? Turner sees the translation process as a performative ritual. The stone in the hat wasn't just a way to hide his eyes, it was a sensory deprivation technique that allowed Joseph to enter a sort of trance-like state. Turner argues that for Cowdery, sitting across the table, hearing this flow of text coming from a man with his face in a hat, the experience was overwhelmingly supernatural. It was a shared delusion or a shared reality depending on your faith, but it was deeply, intensely spiritual. So my thoughts on these two chapters here. This is where the two-front war is really won. Notice what has happened to the plates by the time we get to chapter 5. Where are they? Well, during the translation process for both books, they're covered up with a cloth, or they're out in the woods, and eventually they're delivered to the angel. Joseph doesn't even look at them anymore. He's looking at the stone in his hat. This is the ultimate synthesis. He's using a tool of the folk magician, the seer stone, to produce the product of the Protestant minister, the Bible, the Book of Mormon. Brodie misses this synthesis because she thinks the magic is just a fraud. Turner sees it, but I just want to push it further here. Joseph solved the crisis of authority described by Nathan Hatch in our last episode by merging these two worlds together. The minister had the book, but no power. The magician had the power, but no text. Joseph Smith said, I have the stone and the book. When Oliver Cowdery sat down to write, he wasn't just watching a man dictate a novel. He was watching a man channel the divine. The text of the Book of Mormon itself is designed to hook them like Cowdery. It is filled with plain and precious truths. It answers the questions that Cowdery, a schoolteacher and intellectual, had been asking his whole life. The genius of the translation process was that it was participatory. It wasn't just Joseph telling a story. It was Joseph and Oliver and others discovering a religion together, day by day, chapter by chapter. So, where does this leave us at the end of these 3 chapters? The Book of Mormon's going to be finished. A copyright is going to be secured. The Gold Bible is no more. It's been translated away to the angel. And the book is ready to be printed. But notice the cost. To get here, Joseph had to alienate his in-laws. He, at this point, has lost his first child. And he had to financially ruin Martin Harris along the way. Fawn Brodie looks at the end of this period and sees a man who has successfully pulled off the greatest hustle in American history to this point. She sees a man who is now trapped by his own success, forced to start a church to keep the game going. John Turner looks at the end of this period and sees a man who has been radically transformed by his own creation. He sees a Joseph Smith who actually believes his own voice is the voice of God. The mask has become the face. And my take, I see a man who has successfully built the bridge. He started in the mud with a peepstone, looking for pirate gold to save his father's farm. He ended in a farmhouse with a scribe, dictating a new covenant to save the American soul. He used the plates to get out the door. He used the translation to open the heavens. And now that the heavens are open, the real trouble begins. Because a book is one thing, a church is a government of sorts. Next week, we're going to look at what happens when this great and spacious building actually opens its doors. We'll discuss the organization of the church, the arrival of Sidney Rigdon, and the migration to Kirtland. We'll ask the question, can a democracy of revelation survive, or must it inevitably become a dictatorship of the prophet? I'm Dr. Wayne Denton. Thank you for walking through history with me today. If you have thoughts on this video, my take, John Turner's take, Fawn Brodie's take, leave them in the comments. Questions of was the gold necessary? Were the plates necessary? Could Mormonism have started without the plates? Let me know what you think. Let me know your thoughts on all of this. If you liked what you saw today and you're not already subscribed, please do that. Please like this video. And until next week, keep reading between the lines and I'll see y'all on the flip side.